I'm David from Laowa Photography, and today I am reviewing the Laowa 100mm f2.8 APO macro CA Dreamer 2x magnification 67mm threaded macro lens for Sony FE. I think they make this in other mounts, but this one's for Sony FE. Today we're reviewing it on the Sony A7R IV, just to show you how ridiculously stupid sharp this lens is, because it is seriously stupid sharp, and probably one of the best lenses that have come out for the A7R IV. Its only competition is the Voigtlander 110mm APO Lanther, but I feel like this is equally as sharp, but at half the cost. So let's go ahead and take a look at it. This lens has 12 elements in 10 groups. 2 of those elements are ultra low dispersion elements, and it's also an APO design, APO chromatic, and it's a completely metal lens, which is really nice. The only problem is it doesn't have any contacts, so there is no exchange of EXIF data. But on the plus side, you don't need an adapter to use it. Just put it on aperture priority and pretty much go. The strange thing about this lens is how much movement there is in the lens. So there is a little bit of focus breathing, but it's actually completely usable. The f-stops go from f22 down to f2.8. And it is a 2x macro, so meaning it does a magnification of 2 to 1. And it also has a 13-bladed diagram. The blades are curved to give you an extra kind of smooth oval bokeh ball in the background. And it does come with this lens hood. And the crazy thing is, when you're focused at infinity, the body of the lens assembly is sucked into the body of the lens about 2 inches. So when you put this lens hood on, it actually gives you a total depth of about 4.5 inches, which is really, really deep. So realistically, you probably don't need the lens hood unless you're doing macro work that's all the way focused in, where the elements are really close to the front. So this is what the lens flare looks like indoors with LED lights, and you can see it's pretty well controlled, but you know, you get some ghosting going on when you're moving between lights. Definitely not a big deal. When you take the lens hood off, let me take it off here. There we go. It really makes no difference indoors. Maybe right there, slight difference if you're shooting a light like straight on. But in reality, most macro lenses actually look like this. This is fairly normal. But with this one, you have the lens grouping body inside the lens body. And when you're focused anywhere from 3 feet to infinity away, it's pretty deep in the lens body. So I don't know that you really need a lens hood unless you're doing macro work. And even then, the lens hood almost gets in the way of what you're doing because it's so deep. So just something to consider. Here's what the lens flare looks like outside, shooting about 5 feet away from a bush. And you can see it's a little bit more pronounced when you have some backlight going on, but it's not too bad. And this is with the hood on. So now let me take the hood off. This is with the hood off. So let me just kind of pan over to some other flowers, and you really see, you get a little bit of ghosting, but it's not too bad. Pretty well controlled. But this is pretty typical for macro lens. They usually have more ghosting than regular lenses. So the close focusing on this is actually 3 inches from the front of the lens. This is Happy Robot Baby's cousin. Let's call him Donnie. Alright, so this is the view that we have from the back, and this is a magnification of 2 times, meaning that the lens is projecting the image twice the size as real life onto the sensor. Not necessarily what the sensor is showing us on the back of the camera. That's slightly larger, but that's what it's doing. So the one thing that I don't like about this lens that I wish more manufacturers would do is give Sony manual focus lenses electrical contacts, because it has no idea what f-stop we're at. So this is one of my favorite lenses of all time. This is the Tokina 20mm Farron f2 lens, and no adapter needed. This has really good electrical contacts. So when you look at the back of this, the f-stop actually says what I have it set at. It changes as I change the f-stop on the lens, which is nice. And when I focus in, it automatically magnifies as I focus in to tell me that it's focused in. One lens that does actually have the same electrical contacts as the Tokina Farron would be the Voigtlander APO Lanther macro lens 110mm f2.5, and that's very similar to this lens, but it's $600 more than this lens, and this lens is equally as sharp. So yeah, I guess I can live without the electrical contacts for now. All right, let's look at some of these photos. So the Laowa 100mm macro has actually been in the studio now for a couple of weeks. So it's been in use already, actually a couple of months, really, since it came out. And it has actually done us very well. So this photo was used in an ad for Four Peaks Mining Company. I believe this was Valley Guide in October. And then this was, I think, Valley Guide in October as well, or sorry, Wear Magazine in October. And you can see it is really, really sharp. And the bokeh in this shot, you can see like when there's highlights coming off of stuff, there is just some slight onioning, but it's very, very minor. Overall, really pretty good. And these were all shot with the A7r IV. So let me skip ahead here. This was last month's Wear Magazine. This was a full page ad. And you know, these ads are only 7.5 by 10, so I actually didn't sharpen these at all. And if we zoom in, you can see that there's some diffraction going on. This is a little soft. But I shot this at f22, and at f22 this lens actually does pretty well. At 7.5 by 10, everything is in focus, so it actually looks pretty good. So I had Noah take a shot of me outside, and if you look at the background, really the bokeh in general is usually pretty soft. This actually looks pretty good. The thing I like about this lens versus the Laowa 105mm STF is it's very easy to focus, because at f2.8 it is really sharp. So if we just zoom in and look at my eyes, you can see they're in focus, and you know, pretty much has my whole head, my shoulders, everything in focus. Now this was shot at ISO 400, so it's not like super creamy and buttery, and we didn't edit it all. So anyway, that's what it looks like. Here's me acting like an idiot, but I wanted to do this in a high contrast situation so you could see what the bokeh looks like in the background. And again, you get a little bit of onioning when there's a high contrast situation, but really it's not too bad. So then I had Noah go out and shoot kind of around the studio and see what he could get. And so he went out and shot these images at f5.6 to f11. And f5.6 is the sweet spot of this lens, and it's really obvious when you're shooting outside that that's definitely what it is. No chromatic aberrations, everything just looks really clean. Same with this shot, although I think he stepped down a little bit, probably f11 for this. Again, really, really sharp. You can see that hair that's lying across these flowers in the middle of the screen. That's just really weird, but it shows you how sharp this lens actually is. And right here, the texture of the rust, you can see it is very rusty. And from corner to corner, it looks really, really good. Now with this shot, I just wanted to show you how creamy the bokeh was behind these flowers. When you don't have a high contrast situation, the bokeh is very pleasing. Now this one I shot on the A7r IV in the studio just to give you an idea of what full macro looks like. So this is the little tiny flower inside of a bougainvillea. And what I focused in was this little node, this little pod inside the center of the flower. And it's in focus and everything around it is in focus. But when I shot this, I think I shot this at like f11, and you can see that the areas that are in focus are just crazy stupid sharp. I mean, it's really a really nice macro lens. But what I wanted to show you on here, if you see this line right here, this kind of odd little line, that actually is a longitudinal chromatic aberration, I believe. And that usually happens in situations where you have just a slight amount of glare coming off of something. And I don't remember what was glaring onto this, but there was something really minor. It could have been with the lighting. Honestly, I don't remember. So anyway, let me show you this image in Photoshop. So these are palm trees. And the palm trees create crazy chromatic aberrations. So if we zoom in here, you'll see that there are no chromatic aberrations whatsoever. And usually most lenses will show some sort of chromatic aberration here. Now under the lens corrections, you can see I've got remove chromatic aberration turned off. So let's go ahead and open the image. And I believe this was on the A7R III. And let me just zoom into it here. And you can see it's just a really sharp, clean image. And again, this is actually really easy to focus in on, even though it's closer to infinity, simply because at f2.8 everything is so sharp. And then he stopped us down to f5.6 to the sweet spot just to show you what this looked like. So let's go back to our images again. So now for a quick comparison. So sharpness wise, what you need to know about this lens is at f2.8, let me get to the center of this right here. This is 4100 lines of resolution. At f4 it's about 4800 lines. At f5.6 we're hitting 5200 lines of resolution, and this was shot on the A7R III. And at f8 we're about 5150, so it's still super sharp in the center. Really very impressive. So let me just zoom out here and we'll go into a corner, and let me show you what the corner looks like at 100%. So at f2.8 you can definitely see there's a little bit of vignetting going on. The corner's a little darker, but everything around it is still very sharp. At f8 that corner is excellent. You can see every little flaw in my really old resolution chart. And let me go to the bottom of this. Now in the bottom we have this little bent page that kind of shows you the highlight of the paper. And you can see at f2.8 there's still some vignetting going on. It's a little dark, but you can see the glistening of the paper still. It looks better at f4 and really good at f8. Okay, so from the center of this is f8, f11, f16, and f22. At f16 and f22 you see diffraction setting in. But the thing is, all lenses, all macro lenses have diffraction at f22. This lens is not as bad as most. That's the only way I can describe this. It's not perfect. I was hoping it would be just a hair sharper at f22, but it's not as bad as, like, say, the Tokina 100mm that we just reviewed. That thing was terrible. But you can see this little bent corner of the page down here in the corner, not super sharp, but you still get a very usable photo out of this. And if you want to get the sharpest photo that you possibly can, you shoot at f8 and you focus stack and you combine 3 or 4 images together. The problem is we're in a studio environment, and so usually we're a little bit more fast-paced and we don't have time to do that. So what we're going to do is shoot at f22, try to get everything into focus, and then sharpen it. And that's typically what we do. And it just depends on how the photo is being used, but in most cases that's what we end up doing. f22 is completely usable on this lens, so that's pretty much what you need to know about it. All right, let me just pull this photo into Photoshop, and what you're going to see here is just a little bit of barrel distortion at the top, and you can see how it has this kind of pincushion effect, and it's kind of pinching this in. If we go to filter, lens correction, typically putting this at 2 or 3 is going to fix that, actually -3, because I just made that a lot worse. There we go. And now you can see that line going across the top is really pretty straight. So that's the only downfall, is this lens is a full manual focus lens. It doesn't have any electronics on it at all. So there's no EXIF data to autocorrect this. This is something you have to do on your own. This is the only issue that I have with this lens. Now going back in here, the last thing I want to show you is what the vignetting looks like. Now the reality is all lenses vignette. Some are a little bit more than others. This one is just average. So this is what you need to know. At f2.8 at full frame, this is the vignetting that you actually get. So it's 2.5 to 2 3/4 stops to the extreme corner. At f4, it's actually 1.5 stops to the extreme corner, and at f5.6, it's half a stop to the extreme corner. Now, if you're shooting APS-C size, it would probably look a little bit more like this. And so you would have very minor vignetting at f2.8, maybe half a stop. So if you're using this on the A6400, there's really no vignetting at all. At f4, it's completely gone, and it's gone onwards. So anyway, that's what you get to look for as far as the image quality. Overall, I really like it. There are some weird things, like when we got this lens, it came with the skylight filter, which I have no problem with. I'm not a fan of skylight filters, but it had one on there. It's easy enough to take off. Initially, I thought it was because of how deep this element goes. The reason why I think that skylight filter is actually on there to begin with was to keep dust out, because if we look inside here, we've got these tracks. And these tracks, if I stick my finger in there, are really, really oily. And that's just so the lens body, and when I mean body, like the lenses, the elements are in their own sub-body within the lens body. When that twists, the whole thing is moving on a track up the lens. And so that thing has to be pretty heavy lubricated. And it's probably a little over lubricated, but because they needed to do it, I believe that's why the skylight filter is on there. But as far as image quality goes, nothing in this price point comes close to this. The thing is just sick. It's stupid sharp. I highly, highly recommend it. The only downside to the image quality is it's got a slight pincushion distortion effect. So anyway, there you go. Hope you guys like this review. Give me a thumbs up, leave me a comment, subscribe to my channel for more information like this. We'll talk to you guys later. See ya.